I went through a real rough patch, nearly 10 years ago now. It caused me to be homeless for a very short time. Being homeless in the city means plenty of shop fronts to sleep under, cardboard boxes in alleyways, and even communities of other people without a roof over their head. Being homeless in the country means finding a big enough tree in the woods to give you some shelter, and fighting animals for food so you can actually eat something. It also means that sometimes you witness crazy stuff, all whilst hiding behind the trees. I've seen a couple go deep into the woods for a special meeting several times, whilst I know both of their actual partners are at home. I've seen a guy talking to his dog like he's some kind of therapist, letting it all out to this canine doctor. And man, did he have some weird stuff to confess. Kids drinking, people smoking weed. Scandalous, but everyday people drama. However, one day, I saw something that was about as least as an everyday routine as you can possibly get. It was around early November time, and it was right when the evenings and nights were starting to take their toll. At the time, I'd managed to make myself a sort of den that I'd crawl into, having found various blankets and other stuff that I regularly raided. But it was still pretty freezing out, and I was beginning to worry about how I was going to last all throughout the winter, much less survive with little food. And there was also less food to gather now too. Several of my buddies seemed to be starting to hibernate, so at least I felt like I had competition for what food was left. I had a little fire going, having just enjoyed some rabbit that I'd caught, when I heard the sound of something moving really fast through the tree line. I usually tried to put the fire out, or at least cover it, so I didn't draw any attention to myself. But there was no way whatever was trampling through was a person. It sounded big, and animals usually don't come near me if they see fire. There aren't many predators out there, but I wanted to be prepared. The crashing and banging of this whirlwind was coming closer and closer when it came to an abrupt stop, not too far away from where I was, settled in for the night in my little den. I could see just by the light of my fire a huge figure of some sort of creature. It appeared to be standing up on two legs, but also appeared as if it was in great pain, and it was flipping its great mass all over the place. I heard it howl and growl, and for a second in the light, I could just make out what it was. It appeared to be a bear. Now I was worried, as this beast was clearly rabid or diseased from the way it was acting. I just stayed very still, glad I was still partially hidden by my den and the trees I was around. I considered extinguishing the fire again, but decided not to draw any attention. And then, in the dull light of the flame, something even scarier had happened. I watched open-mouthed and trying my best not to scream or throw up, as the bear seemed to shed its skin. The low light only allowed me to see so much, and I was grateful, as the whole process appeared barbaric. Bones breaking and shattering, skin tearing, the bear screaming simultaneously. Thank God it only lasted for a few moments. And there stood exactly where the bear had been, not even moments before, was a man, naked, dropped to his knees, and panting. He was back up, and never made a sound. He eventually got his breath, jumped up, and ran off. I didn't recognize him, but then I only saw him from the back, and in such faint lighting from the fire. Plus, I was in shock from what I had just witnessed. I'm not sure I would be able to process this if I knew him or not. I've heard about werewolves, seen plenty of movies, and those movies also showed the whole man to wolf transformation. What I think I saw that day was reverse, It appeared that I saw a werebear turn back into a man, and it was every bit as horrific. I understand this sounds absolutely crazy, and probably fictional, and I never in my wildest dreams would have imagined this being remotely true, but I can't deny the truth of what I saw. My guess is that there was some serious black magic or curse involved. It's the only way to explain such a bizarre, supernatural phenomena. My family are originally from Russia. My grandparents have some incredible stories about the old land, as they refer to it as. One of my favorites was about an elder who lived in one of the villages, who everybody was afraid of, as they believed he had the power to shapeshift and transform into animals. Wolves, bears, you name it. But he had a primary liking to shapeshifting into a bear, or what we call a werebear, as Western culture realizes this. Since this particular legend was meant to have happened centuries ago, it obviously wasn't any proof other than the word of mouth retelling this story over and over. But my grandpappy also believed that he had seen this famous werebear, because, just like their lichen counterparts, they are immortal unless they are killed in a very specific fashion, and this one was still around when my granddad was just a boy. Just like a vampire, I guess, the man would walk about in the daytime and appear like anybody else. I guess he must have moved around a lot, as to not cause suspicion, or maybe he was just awesome at disguises. Anyway, when Grandpappy knew him, he was still something of a loner, a village weirdo, a large lumbering man who was good at manual labor, but not much of a conversationalist, which seemed to suit him fine, as he was able to keep to himself without drawing too much attention. But of course, that kind of man does attract a certain attention, that of children who like to dare each other to do stupid stuff, like follow the funny man one evening and see where he goes, which was exactly how it came to be that my own grandpappy followed him into the woods one evening after having been dared by a group of older boys. Being nearly 100 years ago, there were no streetlights, not in a tiny rural village in Russia anyway. But thankfully, it was a full moon, so the light of the moon gave enough light. He said that he followed the guy right through the wilderness until he got to this sort of shack. My grandpappy was about to run back and tell the boys when the man ripped open the shack door and began screaming. Of course, the most sensible thing to do right then would have been to run far away. He just clung to the tree and prayed this giant of a man who was madly screaming and howling was maybe just having a mental break and needed to go out there and let off some steam. All of a sudden, he heard this terrible cracking sound. Cracking and screaming. He just stood there, terrified and mesmerized, as this huge hulk of a man changed from a man to a bear. A huge, hairy, massive, powerful man-bear with ginormous paws and claws. It began howling and stumbled off, smashing through brush. Once this thing had run off, my grandfather raced home, flooding with tears. He said he never told the other boys or anybody what he'd seen. He was simply too afraid, as if somehow retelling the story would make it all too real. But he made sure to never go anywhere near that man again. And that's my grandfather's story. He's always been pretty upfront with me about how real it was, and has never lied about it. Now, could that have any correlation to modern-day werewolves or werebears? I don't know. I like to think of it that he was cursed. When I was a kid, a group of us went camping. School or church group. Something like that, which I can't quite remember. Anyway, it involved woods and a river, and a whole lot of water activities like whitewater rafting. It was great fun, good times, apart from the last night. We'd been warned about the wildlife, and of course, there were plenty of adults there. The exact camping area we were in was pretty secure, but there was an occasional bear sighting here and there. Mainly if you left some food out, they might come nosing about. I had seen one particular bear a couple of times in the distance when we were doing some of the water activities, namely kayaking. What struck me about him was his coloring. I thought that bears were solely black, or at least a dark brown. This one was kind of a light gray. Very unusual. I never saw him close to the camp. He or she was always off in the distance. It was on the very last night that I got to see him up close. I must have had too much cocoa by the fire. I woke up sometime in the middle of the night, desperate to go to the bathroom. And I didn't want to have to go too far since it was so dark. I didn't have a flashlight or anything, so I just headed over to the trees, just behind the tents. I kept thinking of the girl's tent hearing me, so I ended up going a bit further. Just after I finished peeing, I heard this noise coming behind me. I crouched down, avoiding my own urine, even though I wasn't doing anything wrong. But it's embarrassing, and I still didn't want to get caught. That's when I could see the outline of a person, and it kind of looked like one of the park ranger guys who we'd seen wandering about sometimes, who'd also warned us about leaving food and trash outside. He looked like he was off somewhere in a rush, and then all of a sudden, he bent over, and that's when this began happening. His whole body seemed to shake, like he was having a seizure. That's when I was frozen on the spot. Suddenly, in this horrific moment, he just seemed to change. I don't know what I was looking at. It was also super dark, with just enough light from the sky. Then, once his body had started to slow down from shaking, I realized what I was seeing. I couldn't understand back then, and to be honest, I'm still not even 100% sure, even to this day. As the ranger had turned from a regular old dude with grayish hair to the bear that I kept seeing. Once he had fully transformed, he went off running further into the trees, and I went back to the tent, where I did not sleep for the rest of the night. Of course, when I told the other kids in the morning, they thought it was the best story ever. I was just glad we were getting ready to go. Once we were all bundled back into the bus to leave, the warden comes up to say bye, and he looked me right in the eyes, as if he knew, and told me personally he hoped we'd all be back very soon. I never went back, but the thought and image of him shape-shifting into this bear never has left my mind.